Hello, and welcome to the Weekly Scroll Podcast. My name is Ryan.
Oh, and I'm Kayla. Sorry, I got
Yep.
tripped up immediately by my own self.
No
Hi, I'm
worries.
Kayla Dice. I am a tabletop role-playing game designer who releases work as Ratwave Gamehouse. If you're familiar with any of my work, it might be from things like Terminal, Transgender Deathmatch Legend, Follow Me in the Night, Accursed Radio, Feel the Taste of Blood, and much more. I bounce around genres a lot. I tend to say that the thing that links my work is a focus on themes of connection and alienation. And at the moment, I am on Kickstarter crowdfunding for a new game called PSYCHODUNGEON, which is a fantasy workplace action drama played with no dice and no masters.
Yeah, there's so many questions that come from that introduction. As you know, we don't write anything down here. It all is tangents. The name of the game of the Weekly Scroll Podcast. But this is the third time that that you're here on the show. So thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, and one thing you mentioned was Terminal, which I have right here. Gorgeous book. Very excited to get it. I think we said this too right before the show. It's bigger than I thought it was. I don't know why I assumed it was a zine size. Maybe I didn't pay attention, but it is a thick boy, and it's full, like 8.5 by 11. This is a lot of game right here.
Yeah. I ended up going with A4 partly just for like the ratio of it, and partly I liked how it opened up some more like layout spaces that I felt that were interesting in A4. But yeah, I'm really happy with the book. I'm really happy it's in the hands of like the vast majority of backers. It's on my web store now as well, and I'll have some physical copies at UK Games Expo. So yeah, that was a long sort of road to getting the physical one out, and I'm really excited with it. PSYCHODUNGEON is going to be A5 though, so that's going to be zine size, but it's probably going to end up. I think it will be like, it's less actual words for sure, but I think it will probably have a thicker spine than Terminal just by virtue of being A5 rather than A4.
So it'll be A5. It'll be perfect bound, or
Yeah, it will almost definitely be perfect bound. Because I was like, oh yeah, probably, and then I'm like, no, I'm the campaign's live, and I've only budgeted for perfect bound. It's perfect bound. That's not changing.
there we go. And the other one that, like I said, I put it in a Doom pile somewhere, and I'm very sad I wasn't able to find it. And we said this before, the second the show's over, I'm going to find it. But Ritual Magic for Besties was the second time you came on. And that's also in hands of people, including mine, when I can find it. So between both projects, I know one was on Kickstarter, one was on BackerKit. And both are fulfilled. Kind of how's those last two projects been as far as like being on? I know because this is your third one now, at least of the three that I'm aware of. How was Kickstarter? How was BackerKit? And how was getting all of that out of your hands and into the hands of people?
Yeah, so Ritual Magic for Besties, it was crowdfunder instead of BackerKit. And
Crowdfunder, that's what it is.
this is it. So I've never done BackerKit, and lots of people do really recommend BackerKit. I found Ritual Magic for Besties, the crowdfunder campaign, there was a huge struggle, I think, with getting seen and getting people to join up to crowdfunder in a way that I even know in terms of alternatives like BackerKit doesn't seem to have as much of that barrier. But it was a struggle in that sense. The thing I did in the end find useful is I think I'd like planned out my time and how quick we were going to be doing the turnaround. So like, it's kind of only a month apart that I sent out the physical copies of Ritual Magic and Terminal, whereas Terminal's campaign obviously ended like way before, but it was a longer road there because while we'd finished the writing and everything, once we finished the campaign, we then had to do all of the stretch goal writers' work because I had to wait till the money was in to pay them. There's more art coming in. I then had to do all of the layout. And then for printing stuff at one point, I had a fulfillment partner where things didn't really just ended up being easier to split and do them myself. So those two fulfillments, the first time I'd opened a store about like a month prior, so I'd done some sort of, posting and shipping. But those two were the first big fulfillments, and it was a lot of like learning curves. But yeah, it's really nice to get books physically in people's hands and yeah, to see and hear from people that they've received their work, especially with Terminal, where at least to how my brain works, if something's that size, I find it so much easier once it's physical, and so I'm excited for it to be out in the world.
Yeah, this is definitely one that we're going to chat about here on the show at some point. For those in podcast land, I held up Terminal. The layout is beautiful, the art's beautiful. I know I saw a lot of this prior, when we were going over stuff. I saw a lot of things in like the press kit and everything, but it's so well done, and I love a lot of these like spreads and pages. Like I really love this page because the blue is a lot different than a lot of what you see in the background because there's more dark to it. So it's just, the art is fantastic, and it's just a really, really neat game. I'm really excited to dig in more and actually go over that here on the show.
Yeah, Gormengeist is a brilliant artist, and I can't give her enough sort of credit and appreciation for just the sort of control of palette and capturing the spirit of that game. It absolutely wouldn't be the game it is without that collaboration.
How was it kind of handing over like so much of the way your game visually is going to be to like one person? Whether they just like was there anything difficult about that, or did you find it to be like exactly what you wanted because they were able to capture that? Like how did that feel?
Yeah, so Terminal was the first time I'd worked with an artist. It was also the first time I'd worked with an editor, even. No, that's not true. It's the first time I'd hired an editor for my own work. I'd been edited in other contexts. But it was a really interesting thing. I remember like very early on, I was just like, what stuff's useful for you, what stuff isn't? And I think it was a lot of figuring out what she found helpful. And for us, a lot of it was like, I gave as much sort of details as I could in art direction for anything like material, but I always trusted like any of the execution and blocking and stuff to her, and that was because like that was the thing she wanted and preferred having like the decisions around, whereas she felt very confident when I'd been like super like exact down to details that don't get used on other things. It's interesting, but also there's so many things in Terminal specifically where I feel it conveys stuff of the world that I think would have been hard to put into words. I think like there's a lot of like explicit trans representation in Terminal, but I also think like because of the art, there's a lot more sort of like, I don't necessarily want to say subtle, but just like matter-of-fact representation that comes from, just like a very sort of beautiful rendering of trans bodies.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the art is absolutely stunning. I mean, even just, and the color, like the one thing that I can't ever get over the whole time, and I love it so much, is just the color scheme, like you said. I mean, the kind of like the vaporwave, like matrix, kind of like computer but not computer, which also helped with the binary code over like the entire thing anyway. It was just it's an absolutely stunning book. And like I said, when you get pages that are completely like kind of divorced from that vibe too, it's so vibrant. It's good job. I love this book. It's great.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And you're back in Kickstarter, like you said, with PSYCHODUNGEON. So tell me about like what's the pitch for PSYCHODUNGEON? What are we doing here?
So PSYCHODUNGEON takes place in a sort of post-dungeon fantasy, like a modern setting, but full of magic and high-tech gizmos, called Glendane, which is just a modern city in there. And within the city, when people like sort of, when their troubles and traumas get too much, basically, they emerge as a nightmarish physical structure, a physical psycho-dungeon that reflects all of their sort of pain and turmoil. And then psycho plumbers are called in to sort of clear out this dungeon, help someone get back from the brink, from the edge, and close it off. And the early description, one of the first things I wrote for the game was I described the role of psycho plumbers as, one part handyman, one part adventurer, one part therapist. And I think that got to the heart of what at least the game is for the characters you're playing. You're people who are overworked, not necessarily greatly adjusted, not necessarily super protected by your workplace. You're doing stuff that's really meaningful to the people you interact with, but also that stuff is often going to like carry you home, you're going to end up carrying it home with you, and you're going to be struggling in this sense. It's a lot about mental health and surviving under capitalism. And then it's also a very different kind of, I think, tabletop dungeon crawler, because it's mainly, you know, built on a belonging outside belonging framework. There's no dice, there's no game master, there's just like a variety of roles, procedures, and all stuff that sort of supports a token-based economy. And, you know, it works great for like a really fun sort of simple one-shot, but also I think there's so much cool stuff in the game that really lives and breathes when you just get a sort of longer-term story. It's got a sort of procedural drama bent mixed with, yeah, sort of postmodern or a sort of contemporary fantasy, magical realist thing mixed in. It's got some of the social commentary that has been picked up a lot. Tanya Floka, who's a game designer I really like, read and gave me a pull quote where they said Psychodungeon is a post-fantasy, post-Blairite, post-like modernist nightmare. And yeah, I think it reflects a lot of anxieties from the real world, while also being a cool game about being a screw-up who's just doing their best.
Yeah, so lots of fun, interesting things going on with this that intrigues me a lot. I've had Dream Apart, Dream Askew on my shelf and on our list to do for a while. But for those that don't know, can you tell us a little bit about Belonging Outside Belonging, and then thereby also like No Dice, No Masters?
Yeah, so the first Belonging Outside Belong game I ever played would have been Dream Askew. I think even before it was published in like the Dream Askew Dream Apart game, it's invented by Avery Alder and Benjamin Rosenbaum, and then it's been featured in other games like Wander Home or Tournament Arc or Our Haunt. And so, yeah, there's no game master figure. There's, you know, people's characters who all have playbooks, and then there are often different setting elements in these games where, I think, for instance, in Dream Askew, it's stuff like sort of the toxic, the psychic maelstrom is one, or people representing sort of scarcity, where you have access to moves, where like you can do these things, this stuff happen playing this element. And then there's sort of a token economy to your playbook characters where you're, you know, making moves which give you tokens, often because you're putting yourself in a vulnerable position in some way, and then you can use those tokens to make your strong moves. It's, you know, it's been evolved in lots of different ways. The main reason I describe Psychodungeon as No Dice, No Masters rather than, I tend to say it's built on a Belonging Outside Belonging rule set, because people understand that. Though I know at least in Dream Askew, Dream Apart, Avriel does a section talking about like what the term Belonging Outside Belonging meant to her, and it's mentioning like this idea of like finding community outside of community. And I think Psychodungeon does have a lot of focus on, you know, where you belong, but I don't necessarily think you're inherently in a community with the people you work with, because often they're just your co-workers. There's actually a big section on surface life stuff where like you might decide you've got like a really tight-knit, closest family vibe. You might have really siloed lives where you meet each other in this dungeon and then you go home and you don't know anything about each other. So I think it can be about belonging, but I think it's almost about the way that like feelings of community, Psychodungeon specifically, I mean, can be a bit sort of dissolved in like a busy, austerity hit city. And yeah, so the evolution with Psychodungeon, evolution sounds overly prescriptive, but like the changes I've done in Psychodungeon is there's like a mix of roles. The setting elements are kind of comboed with the dungeon, which has responsibility for like, you know, controlling and creating monsters and traps and things. But also then there's the third role, which is the client. And you can be passing around the dungeon role. Then there's all of the playbooks, which are the psycho plumbers. They have access to normal moves. But then the client is someone who, I sort of describe them as a special guest star, because it's only ever one unique person per job. You're not following them from session to session, but they really matter in that moment, like the patient of a week in a medical drama or something. And they have like less sort of access to moves and stuff, but in this game, their understanding of their own issues, which is what allows the game to progress. So it's splitting up a lot of like sort of GM responsibility. I know it says like with no, I know some people talk about like a difference between is a game GM-less or GM full. And I think Psycho Dungeon is like, yeah, it's giving you a lot of procedures to make you confident, but it's GM full and it's like really passing around that responsibility and control essentially.
Yeah, I like how I like the lean that you have in the like no dice, no masters versus the belong inside belonging. And tell me if I'm completely off base with this, but everything, my sense of belonging inside belonging is what you said, how like belong inside belonging, and a lot of the games are having this like small community of people outside a bigger kind of more oppressive community, and like being a part of that. And when you talk about the psycho plumbers potentially just being coworkers, like it's interesting that that's not really kind of the basis for that, but using the no dice, no masters with the token system like that feels like it fits really well in with like the dungeoning client and the token system and everything like that. So it's because I know that like belonging inside belonging is quote unquote PTA and PBTA. Like I just love looking at like in my mind like the trees of like where this game eventually like on the family tree of games comes from.
Yeah, I always love seeing a game which is maybe doing a genre which I see done in both like Forged in the Dark and Belonging Outside Belonging, because they're both coming from PBTA as well. I almost feel like, oh, this is like divergent evolutions of species. Like this is different EV evolutions where you get the like you could probably find a PBTA of a genre and then that BOB and then the Forged in the Dark. I do find that stuff fascinating a lot.
Yeah, it's neat, and this one feels like a break off from that too, where it's very no dice, no masters, which is I think kind of started with belong inside belonging, but is kind of really not belong inside belonging. It's kind of stretching in different directions, so it's really neat kind of divergence you have here with this game. That's cool. One question I had when you were describing it, so are the dungeons that come from people's minds, are they physically in like the real world, or are psycho plumbers actually going into the psyches of people?
I so often think like the entrance is in the real world. It might be sort of, oh, I've got this dungeon entrance in my closet, which that could be full of implications. Or it's in my bathroom, or like, oh yeah, sorry, they're like this back alley behind my flat is full of this dungeon entrance. And then like there's sort of a shifting dreamscape a little bit, or maybe more nightmarescape is more accurately. They're a physical location that the client is going into them with. And yeah, the fact is that they're this thing that exists, and if they're not closed off, the way that they work is they're like draining energy and motivation and feeling from the client, and they will just sort of eventually leave them as a husk unless they are hit sort of at the root and essentially like ripped out. But I think of them as an almost weird half-dimensional space.
That's neat. It reminds me a little bit. Have you ever looked at the manhwa Solo Leveling? I know the animated for it just came out.
I've not seen that.
It's similar in a little bit different way, but like, yeah, this world, for some reason, randomly in this world, these dungeon entrances start appearing. So all you see is the gate to go in, but it's very like manhwa, like you level up in a dungeon, kill monsters, get power, and there's capitalism because that fuels machines and whatever. But it reminds me a bit of that, where the way you're describing it is like there's a gateway, but the dungeon itself is like, I mean, you can go around the gateway, but the dungeon goes in there. But it's neat. It's you should check it out. I think you'd really dig it.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
But how in the world, how are psycho plumbers seen? Like, are they seen as like like a therapist would? Like, some people see that as, they're like a medical professional, so there's like a little bit of like a status to it. Or are they more workmen? Are they like more like plumbers? Like, how are they kind of seen in society? Are they like appreciated, or are they seen as just like another like workman job?
Yeah, so the thing I end up saying about like psycho plumbers, like in text at least, is it's a low paid job. It's definitely in a sort of working class area. The job is dangerous, and it has that sort of level of respect of danger, And it probably does involve like, you know, being knowledgeable at least. But I sort of think of like the level of intervention and training you have is probably similar, more closer to a first aid course than a medical degree, for instance, if you're using like a health or therapy analogy. But in terms of like how they're seen in society, like are people like seeing them as adventurers or heroes or sort of thing sensitively? I think the book leaves that open. Because definitely for me, I imagine a lot of the particulars of how the job functions. It's one where I imagine people are taking influence either from like basically from jobs they're familiar with, either in a personal level or probably through TV. I know so much of the writing in Psycho Dungeon was a lot of it influenced by my time as a teacher, which I did for about on and off in weird different ways, like around 4 years of teaching. And then I quit because it just could never work for me. So I know if I was playing a game of people, it's going to end up having that structure a lot. I'm also sure some people who are big into medical dramas will probably take a lot from like hospital settings or stuff, or people who experience with work is more, if someone had more direct experience with, say, counseling or stuff, that might inform it. I think of there's less hard facts to the setting of Glendane and Psycho Dungeon than you might imagine. And it's a lot of like, well, what is your version of this world at the table? I hope the game and the book does do a bit to sort of facilitating that process of discovery.
And I just want to also say, in case it came out weird, vocations are fantastic. Plumbers and electricians and everyone, we need you. I meant more blue collar versus white collar, not like lesser status by any stretch of the imagination, because what a lot of those people do is a lot more important than what a lot of people with white collars that just steal our money do. So
oh yeah, absolutely.
Since it is a descendant of the PBTAs, it does have playbooks. And as of right now, there are 7 in them. Tell us a little bit about kind of the playbooks and the structure and how you can kind of play these characters.
Yeah, so the playbooks, there are 7. There is the wizard, the witch, the cyborg, the werewolf, the shapeshifter, the sword fighter, and the rock star. And sort of by implication of the playbooks, you do get this thing of like, okay, no one has a specific psycho plumber job degree. They all focus mostly on sort of, I think, like different narrative thrusts. Like the wizard is very focused on the wizard. Part of the motivation for the wizard was I wanted to reframe like what would being qualified as a wizard be if that wasn't in an academia world, if that was like a sort of vocational trade school. So, but the wizard is then like, oh, I committed a lot to training to be a wizard. I don't know if I fully understood everything I was signing up for. I don't know if I'm cut out for this. That was definitely very inspired by teaching. The witch, the witch's focus is very on sort of the parallels the experience of like monetizing a hobby and how that can really sort of sour that relationship with a hobby. The werewolf is really sort of focused on like your relationship with your body, because of where like lycanthropy will have been picked up in a Psycho Dungeon. And that is in a lot of ways kind of an allegory for chronic pain. The cyborg is so about balance. That's kind of an allegory for chronic fatigue. The shapeshifter is really sort of a story about a completely destroyed work-life balance and how you've been sort of like crammed into different things and maybe lost everything other than this job. The sword fighter then is a big focus on like, well, what is someone starting out? Like the sword fighter is me when I decided I wanted to be a teacher, whereas maybe the shapeshifter was me by the end of my 3rd year of teaching. And then the rock star's a big focus on like art, and some of them I came at them from different angles. Like wizard and witch, it was me going like, yeah, I want a version where the wizard is a blue collar job. And then the witch was kind of almost complicating that, because I was like, well, you know, if magic exists in this setting, but anyone can learn magic, it's mainly sort of cultural. I kind of ended up looking at witch as something that was perceived as a sort of pink collar job, where it's seen as more sort of soft skill. And obviously it's the thing where like by implication, you can just look at this and go like, well, they can both do exactly the same things, but there's some space for that exploration. The werewolf was very like, I wrote something and then I looked back at it and I was like, oh, this is really about my experience with fibromyalgia. Whereas something like the shapeshifter, that started from the point of, I want to play a book about what happens when you are really burnt out and you've lost this balance. And I thought about how I was going to present that a few different directions. And then I landed on the idea of it's a shapeshifter. So the approach is all different. The playbooks, they're sort of distinguished by the different moves they have. They all have access to strong and vulnerable moves, as well as lateral moves by which they can give other players tokens. They have lots of pick lists that sort of shade in their unique backstory. You know, it's in that sort of PBTA BOB style. These sort of questions and stuff do guide them in certain shapes, but there's a lot of different ways you could go with any of them. And then they all have their own sort of triggers for how advancement is going, because in the game Psychodungeon, advancement can be, oh, you're sort of getting somewhere good, or it can be you're completely getting stressed out and eventually you're going to be in the position of having a Psychodungeon pop out that you need someone to come in and help clear out for you.
Yeah, that was something that I thought too, is like, what happens when like a psycho plumber creates a psycho dungeon? Is it like a super dungeon because they've been in other people's, or is it just more of the same?
And so there's like some whole advice on it in the section. Like the suggestion in the book is like, you can just follow the regular procedure you've used for building the psycho dungeon before, but this character has access to all of their stuff, but let's still pick things out. There is a note on it though, and this was kind of inspired by teaching stuff, where I do talk about a lot of the procedures, and I do say like they're scaffolds to help you learn and feel very confident with the system, and you might start to diverge from them when you get further along. You might create a psycho dungeon where you're like, actually, I reckon, yeah, this has got way more flaws. It's way more complicated because this is a psycho plumbers one. Or you might go, it wasn't as complicated as it seems. This is smaller. You might mix other things up, because the point is like the procedure has taught you to be confident in making the decision that serves your story best. But there's a lot of guidance on how it works, and then there's a lot of suggestions, because completing your own psycho dungeon, I should say, is a real opportunity for your character to reach a turning point. Like, that's opportunities for, like, you might just quit here. Like, this is clearly not worth it. You can develop into some of the other playbooks. Like, if lycanthropy is developed in a psycho dungeon, you just had your own. Maybe you take this option where you're like, oh, I'd probably get lycanthropy off this. I'm going to take the werewolf playbook. Or, oh, I probably got some injuries. I'm going to take a cyborg playbook. Or you might suggest a version where you're just like, no, my character will go straight back to work. And it's like, oh, are you sure about that? You don't have to and maybe shouldn't. And yeah, it presents options to change a longer sort of term story of these characters, which is really just sort of like, I was about to say slice of life, but that's not quite accurate. But because it's got that sort of like, it's situational in the way like sitcoms or work dramedies are.
Gotcha. You know, one thing I like about the way that you write a lot of things is there's like, how do I say this? It's not necessarily incredibly subtle, but it's always elegant, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, you could read terminal as just terminal, but like if you just literally just like take one layer down, there's like so much going on with it. And, you know, when you're describing the playbooks, that's kind of how it feels, where it's just like you could just play the wizard, or you could understand like where the wizard came from and the places that you pull from a lot of the things that you do, like even with ritual magic and for besties and stuff like that. Like there's never there's always somewhere that it comes from, and a meaning to what it is, and a depth to it. You know, nothing ever feels like it's added in just for like the game or something like that. It always feels like it's added in with purpose and with experience. Is that something you strive for, or is that just kind of like the way that you write, if you get what I'm saying at all?
Yeah, no, totally. First of all, thank you. I really appreciate that, and that feels really nice to be seen, essentially. I do always like to think like, often I guess about the like, what's the first layer? What's the layer where it doesn't matter if someone gets this deeper thing? Are they still getting that cool game? In terms of what I'm drawing on, sometimes, because I've said for years now, I say like I make games and they're a lot of time about connection and alienation. When I first thought of that, it was mainly a sort of retroactive thing. I looked at like the 5 games I'd made at that time and was like, yeah, this is a through line. This is an analysis I can apply to my own work. But as I do go on more, I do sort of think more consciously. And often it's I'm writing something because I think it's cool. The pitch for Psychodungeon came semi-fully formed on my flight back from Gen Con last year, where I just thought, I think the term Psychodungeon came where I'm like, dungeon that comes from all of someone's stresses or traumas, plumbers called in to clear it out. That obviously then expanded though, because then as I started writing up, okay, here's this cool idea, and then I started thinking of what's this about. That brings in the client and stuff, and then I'm consciously going, I'm really informed by my experience teaching and that personal aspect. So I know what I do when I'm bringing it in, like I am often doing that consciously. But sometimes I write something by accident. I wrote The Werewolf, looked back to it, realized, oh, I've written a Chronic Pain playbook. And then I did the second draft of that where I leaned into it and I went with it. But also, like, yeah, there's still that first level where the werewolf is, you're not necessarily engaging with it as an allegory. I think there's a lot of sort of like, oh, this will sound pretentious, but like sort of, yeah, like allegorical resonance in a lot of things I work on. There's the element of that for terminal and coercive control. There's definitely this for like loads of different things, as well as like mental illness in general for this. But I don't ever want that to be like the direct thing. I sort of want this possibility where like, yeah, there'll be people who like really look at it closely and really see it and feel seen by it maybe. And then there's also a level where people don't do that. And I guess why I do like that first layer is also because I'm like, that I guess gives me the separation to go that like people may have read my work, read it really well, seen all the things I meant in it, but also I'm aware like that doesn't mean they know me. There's still like the book always transforms things, and I'm an author, so I'm dead, and so I'm at least aware of like how, in a dead author way, you know, I'm aware of how my intentions and experience inform my work, and I'm also aware of wanting my work to stand on its own, even if people don't know about any of that other stuff. So that was very over-explained.
No, that's perfect. Then that's kind of what I was, the great answer for the question is just, yeah, like the ability for it to stand on its own without knowing you, because without knowing you at all, I read some of your stuff, and then once I know what's, and you get it, you know what I mean? But but then I know you more so now. We spent at this point hours together, and it like you said, it does still really stand on its own. I think you do that incredibly successfully. Do you think that you had kind of like a self-actualization in your writing, in the sense that you said in the first bunch of things you put out, you didn't really think about it, but when you look back, you go, oh, okay, that's what I do, and then like from that point forward, like thought about it more consciously, or like, I guess if that's
yeah, I think often where my ideas start is often sort of from I guess like a sort of simple idea. So for Psychodungeon, the idea was the concept. For Terminal, the initial, I think, idea was I wanted to apply like the Matrix to the system from Inevitable, and other things came after that. For something like, say, 30 Foes is a game I made once. So I was like, I want to make a Seven Samurai game that's really about negotiating as a table. And then I guess I'm often figuring out the angle in. And some of that does usually go back to like, oh, how are these themes that I'm interested in? How am I still exploring them in this space? But other times I think I interrogate myself as a creator a lot. But I do often And I feel like I've never written something where I've like completely gone like, I'm really surprised that's very atypical. I like to think I'm building on myself. I like to think Psycho Dungeon builds on the first Belonging Outside Belonging game that I did that was called To Embrace a Swamp Creature. I like to think like the next game I do with like a real like hardly written setting will be really informed by the work I did on Terminal, and I'll be conscious about knowing it. I'm working on a sequel to Transgender Deathmatch Legend 2, and I can see how that's really informed by what I learned from doing that first one. So even I think when I start from this position of just, oh, what's the fun idea I want to explore? I think often where I end up is often thinking about what have I learned? And that's, I guess, both by other things I've made and also what have I learned in life? And I have, yeah, I think I do have the impulse to always end up putting it into my work, which, yeah, I sometimes I can feel sort of weird about the idea of like, oh, am I putting too much of myself in? But I think it's the side I manage on and I feel good about. I think it's a former stand-up comedian's impulse.
Yeah, I like it. I'm a fan. You know, like I do think that there's a through line for all of your games that I've read where I can read one and be like, this does feel like Kayla. You know what I mean? Like this feels like I can see some stuff from this game too, or I can see this, and especially when you go from like some of your earlier work to Terminal and then on to this one, like there is this through line of at least the perception of you that you can get as much as you can from someone's writing, but also like you said, this growth in this use of allegories and then the expansion on the way that the various systems work and stuff. So it's really neat. I'm excited to see like sequels to things. That's going to be really interesting to see the first one and then see the second one. That'll be cool.
Yeah, that's because I have done some like second edition stuff before, but often it's like really early games I did, which I then just like rewrote like a couple months later. But yeah, I'm interested in the idea of really like properly revisiting stuff.
That's gonna be neat. So the art in Psycho Dungeon, it's different. It's out there. It's it looks like it's very photo collage kind of mixed with a lot of like multi what word am I trying to use? Like other stuff. So like talk to me about the art. It's unique, and especially compared to if you look at something like Terminal.
Yeah, so Terminal does. No, sorry. Psycho Dungeon does have like a more traditionally drawn cover by Jessica Kaczynski, which is a really awesome cover. That was a great experience. But I ended up looking, and this was admittedly mainly for budget reasons. Is I was trying to keep this as a low budget project and see, I guess, almost sort of like, oh, what's like, how well can I do when I'm being quite sort of self-reliant, mainly because just at the moment I'm trying to turn being a self-employed game creator into a job, so I need to sort of see how I can be spending that. So yeah, it's a lot of the art. Internal art is all by me. It's a lot of digital collage, which is then sort of very manipulated in ways. That's where all of the playbook images come from. They're all like I've sort of collaged and meshed, and I was going to say Photoshop as a generic term, but I think but I use Affinity, but that to get different things. And so of the playbooks, it's trying to get like a sort of nice iconic image for things like the wizard, which is, I believe, like that's an image of an electrician, and then I've just added a wizard staff and hat, and then added lots of exposure and colors to the art. With the werewolf as well, yeah, that's a like woman in a shopping market where I've used like a dog features from another public domain thing. I've also started taking a lot of photos. The ones then for the individual dungeon representations is where they get a bit more weird. That's where it's often like very very open to interpretation, sort of like self-consciously capital W weird images. So like a thing representing social life, I've got like a snake running out of a payphone. For adolescents, I've got someone whose facial features have all been sort of like melted, and they're surrounded by people whose mouths are sort of like ravenous. And yeah, because of the way it's overexposed, sort of posterized, like adding halftone stuff. I remember someone compared the style, the literal visual look of it kind of looks like old Game Boy Advance screenshots, which is something I've tried to lean into a bit with the physical layout of this book. I'm sort of drawing a bit of inspirations from like a literal instruction manual, from video game manuals, as well as then lots of sort of more designy elements. And I don't openly describe myself as an artist ever. I've done like this digital collage stuff before. It's similar to, but often usually in combination with other things. So this is like I guess a big shift for me in terms of trying to see, does this visual style, which I think is often really fun and really interesting, is it something that interests people enough that like they are really sort of charmed by a book featuring that style? And I'm hopeful, and the reaction I've got has been very positive. But it's definitely an experiment. And admittedly, this is only like the second Kickstarter third campaign I've done. Everything I'm doing at every point is still sort of an experiment of just seeing what works. But yeah, that's a bit of how the process of the art comes together.
Yeah, it's neat too, because like for anyone that can go to the Kickstarter page right now, which you should, and go back this, even with the layout, like in the top there's like the little buttons, and when you say like the video game advance, now all I see is like controller buttons. So there's like a yellow circle, a green circle, and a red circle. And now that's all I'm ever going to see is like the XY, pyramid, whatever various controllers see on it. Now that's all I'm gonna be able to see. I mean, the layout looks great. You've done a really good job with the art. I think I can't wait to see more of the dungeon art specifically, because of how like unreality based it needs to be. You know what I mean? Like it can get weird because people's psyches get weird. So I'm really curious to see that. But yeah, and you have a couple other people on the project. I know Jess did the cover, but also listed here you have Alyssa Ridley. Are they helping you with writing, editing? Like, what's their association with the project?
Yeah, so Alyssa, she's the editor. She's from Biscuit Fund Games. She's done things like Tournament Arc and Goblin Country and the Levante Papers. So we first hooked up on Terminal. She was the editor for Terminal. I felt like she did such an awesome job on Terminal in terms of really helping like clean up things which were like sort of maybe less clear or less focused on what they were trying to do. So in the same way, I think it's even in the thanks of Terminal where I'm like, this game isn't what it would be without Gormanggeist's art and without the way Alyssa helps develop that. So yeah, so she'll be working on editing the manuscript. I've sent her the initial draft at this point. This is obviously an interesting thing here because the stretch goals can end up expanding this game a bit. So I guess we'll see on how the campaign does there. But yeah, as it is, like she'll sort of start working. We've talked about those ideas a lot, and yeah, she's someone I think is a really brilliant editor, and I do feel like really understood by. I think I feel very seen as a writer by her, and so I think that's part of why I enjoyed working with her so much on Terminal. She was also the editor for Ritual Magic, and so yeah, as long as she's got availability or isn't too busy, I always love having a look over my stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's everybody out there writing stuff. Editors are great. They're really important. Not only will they make sure that your stuff is readable, but also understandable. So get an editor, people. If you're gonna use a crowdfunding thing for anything, fund an editor. They're great people. So the project's been out for, I think it's about 5 days. There's 25 days left to go. I think you're about. So the goal in American is 28.35, but the goal in pounds 16.52. You're at about 2,100 for American, so more than like 4/5 of the way to funding with only 5 days in.
Yeah, I think the last update I got was like 70% of the way, or 72 it may even be, to initial funding. I think like it's been a good launch. I find these things, definitely when I'm in the middle of them, so hard to judge, but yeah, I think it's been a good launch. There's a lot of fun tiers. Some of the cool ones are gone or close to gone. I sold an annotated copy where I'm going to go through, add lots of little notes. I think there's still some chances for people to get their name in the book in sort of in-universe locations or other sort of structure, other ways of presentation. But as it stands now, yeah, you can get the game. You could get it either digitally, physically. There's signature versions. You can help contribute to the community copy pool initially, which was set at the start. Yeah, there's a lot of different tiers, which are mainly just me sort of giving people ways where if they feel like they really want to support the project and add more money, they've got that option there.
Yeah. So tiers wise, it's always interesting when we talk about other countries and stuff. But there's always, the supporter tier, the $1, well, $2, £1 one. Digital is only 10. Is it pounds?
Yeah, that's down as £10 actually. Yeah,
okay. All right.
This is a weird thing because I set my pledge levels on Kickstarter in Great British Pounds. I set my prices on itch in dollars, but I actually usually keep the numbers the same. So should probably actually think about that.
If capitalism could just make euros, pounds, and dollars like the same across the board, that would be great. But how would people make money by stealing people's currency? So digital copy is only £10 or $13. The physical copy is only £20 or $26. The signed copy, £25, $32, and then signed copy plus your name in the book is £35 or $45. And oh no, there's still the signed copy plus the community copy donation. Community copy is always great to put out there for people that aren't able to have the funds to be able to still participate in tabletop gaming. I mean, that's one of the reasons we talk about value on the show is if things are too much, you're really wiping out a lot of your audience. So having things like community copies are such a great thing to have. And then, the annotated copy is gone. So very affordable, especially for the quality of writing that you do all the time. It's fantastic. Anyone that didn't get Terminal before, I highly, highly recommend going to ratwave.uk, grabbing a copy of everything that Kayla. That's what I did. As soon as your store opened, I was like, click, 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 click. All right, I have everything now. So we're good.
I remember that. Yeah, that was the first big order. I was like, damn. All right, nope. Still some business. There you go.
Now I have everything. Yeah, I like I said, I really enjoy your work and being able to get it physical. I mean, clearly I have a problem. So if I enjoy people's stuff, I want to have everything they've ever touched. So we went ahead and did that. But I of all the things, I think a really great entrance into your work is Terminal. I think it's an absolutely fantastic game, and I know it is a little bit bigger than a zine, but I can't recommend this game enough, and I'm really excited to go over it with Hunter here on the show. But definitely want to grab that. And with 25 days left to go, I think so the pledge is at 20. So are your stretch goals written out in Great British Pounds too? Have we looked at stretch goals, or am I looking at like
Great British Pounds?
Gotcha.
Yeah. So if it's easier for currency wise, I can run them down off the top of my head.
Oh no, so for the stretch goals just in general. So you have dungeon textures is your first stretch goal, dungeon scenarios is your second, the fiction excerpts is your third, an extended example play is the fourth, and then the 8th playbook. I'm really excited to see what the 8th playbook could potentially be. But the stretch goals sound really, really interesting. I'm excited, but one thing I think we missed is textures. What are textures as far as the game goes?
Yeah, that's actually an element I forgot to sort of explain. I guess if you're familiar with Wander Home, think of them as, I guess, the evil twin of natures from that game. But basically, so the dungeon has access to lots of moves. It makes aggressive moves where it's trying to essentially attack the people inside, and it makes manipulative moves where it tries to sort of play on the client's emotions or the emotions of the psychoplumbers, because they're not made of stone, they're affected by the things they see, and it uses that to gain tokens. But to shade in an individual dungeon, you pick textures, and these textures usually just reflect the real world issues, and then they're bundling together sort of a different desire that the psycho dungeon wants out of bringing up this texture, and it comes with some sort of monsters and aesthetics to lean on, as well as they were all sort of included some quote that gives an example of how stuff might work in play. I recall, like work is one, and the quote is about someone talking about how they were so dangerously overworked that they were wishing they could have an accident just so they wouldn't be in work. And then it's mentioned that this is from a client whose psycho dungeon was full of skeletons of rusted iron. And then some of the monster suggestions there might be like, oh yeah, if you're using this, maybe you use, you know, construction equipment come to life. Maybe you use these sort of goblins or stuff. And it can go very sort of, they're kind of like broad enough that the way you imagine them for an individual client will really affect them. You know, if parents can be one, and that's obviously so influenced by what are you deciding this character has as their relationship with their parents, and what kind of monsters or stuff is that inspiring. So then the first stretch goal is adding some sort of niche, nastier ones. Basically, the first one, I ended up moving those stretch goals around because just in the back of my mind, I kept thinking of more texture ideas, and I was like, okay, yeah, this will be the first goal because I have thoughts on how I want to do a dungeon texture relating to dysphoria, basically, to gender dysphoria specifically. It's yeah, so that's in the goal. Others, maybe the numbers or stuff will tweak around, especially as ideas come up, but they're all kind of about like just expanding the base offering of the game and making it a bit bigger. Everything about the game as it is works great, but you know, if people are interested and I have the money where I can sort of devote that time to it, I'd like to sort of beef it up in fun ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so dysphoria, medical trauma, unemployment are some of the ones listed in the stretch goal. Those are there's some heaviness to that a bit, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of notes in the game about how you're making sure you're sort of keeping a safe table culture, definitely. But I think if you're all being sort of safe and comfortable with each other, I definitely think Psycho Dungeon is a good game for digging into some quite sort of familiarly painful things.
Yeah. You know, that's one thing I really enjoy about TTRPGs. Like TTRPGs are not therapy. If you need therapy, please go get therapy. Yep. But I love TTRPGs in the sense that it's a way to engage with things that you don't really get to engage with as often in real life. And by things, I mean like if you're playing a action shooter video game or whatever, you're not going out and actively shooting people. But like if you're playing like an adventure game and you feel heroic, you can play like a high fantasy heroic game and engage with those feelings in the same way you can watch horror movies and engage with fear and various things that you don't engage with a lot in real life. And I like being able to play tabletop role-playing games and engage with concepts and emotions and feelings that sometimes you don't get to or you in a way that should be safer because you engage with them as much or as little as you want. It's kind of like getting as close to the danger as you can, but there's always still that like barrier like in the way of it, almost like looking at like first of all, zoos are unethical, don't go to a zoo, but like looking at like a dangerous creature behind a pane of glass, you know what I mean? It's you know, and a lot of times with a lot of the space, especially a lot of OSR games, it's very much like I have a sword, I have a shield, I'm gonna go like fight a goblin or whatever. But again, one of the things I really like about the way that you write is its engagement with concepts and ideas and themes that are not like any of that at all.
Thanks. Yeah, I think definitely certain kind of RPGs. I think almost all RPGs are like in different ways engaging with empathy. And sometimes that means kind of like suspending it if you're playing like a film where you're having a bit of a disconnect from your character. But I definitely think for Psycho Dungeon and other things, the reason you should have like open discussions about keeping your sort of your table safe and comfortable with each other is because I think it's a game that does want, at least as a text, I think it does want some sort of like high degree of empathy to your characters and to your client. And I think in itself it's then also saying about how the fact of like if you're going into situations where you're seeing a lot of upsetting things, you're seeing a lot of people who are struggling in ways you can't always help, you know, how is that sort of affecting your own empathy? I think it's definitely a thing like, you know, if you're watching an action scene, you're not doing that action scene, but Psycho Dungeon is all about feelings, and feelings can be there. Yeah, TTRPG is definitely not therapy, but you can find things therapeutic that aren't therapy in its own way, as long as you still know where one is separate.
Yeah, you know, it's ability to get a little bit of catharsis, you know, in hopefully in a weekly or bi-weekly game with friends. So 75 backers, you 70% of the way, 25 days left to go. Definitely want to go check out Psycho Dungeon, grab this. I want this in hand in the same way that Terminal came in hand. A5, not the gift of a much bigger game that we got with Terminal. If anyone's on the fence about Psycho Dungeon, what can push them over?
I think I'm trying to think, I guess, of it. I'm sort of imagining, what's on the fence for you? And then trying to sort of triangulate a thing. But I guess in terms of, I think it is a game that is got a real sort of bite to it. Is definitely a thing that I think I'd encourage about. I think it's got so many cool ideas at play. I think it's going to look beautiful. And I think we're really going to work at exploring the ideas the game is interested in. But yeah, I also think specifically it's got a bite. It's got a sort of acidicness to the world it portrays. You know, it's about living in a city like so many that's been just like hit and hit and hit by like austerity, where your job that is like so necessary has been like privatized virtually out of existence. And yeah, it's fun and exciting while also being nasty and angry. And then I think asking the question of like, why do you do this? Like, what do you want out of this? And I think, yes, it's informed by an experience of a thing I ended up quitting, but I also think Psycho Dungeon can be a game about figuring out where you belong and what you care about and how you care about yourself. I think is like the sort of central question of Psycho Dungeon, at least in a longer sort of multi-session play. And I think if that's a question that interests you, but also you love the idea of being a cyborg who's going to blast apart a dragon with a laser cannon, and the dragon represented someone's difficult relationship with their mom, like that's the game Psycho Dungeon is. It's all of these things at once.
Yeah, I'm very excited for it. I can't wait to get it. For Psycho Dungeon, I know you said you had a short URL for that. So what is that? And also where can people find the rest of your stuff? I know we mentioned it before, but your shop, your itch, all that kind of stuff. Where, if people are looking for you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so if you go to ratwave.uk, that's my website, which has on there lots of links to all my other stuff. You know, it has links to all of the social media I'm on in different ways because I don't have any consistency of name tags. It will have link to my itch there, the digital store, and then it will also have another link to the Square site I run if you want to grab things from physical store. And I have lots of short form links off of ratwave.uk. So if you just type in psychodungeon.ratwave.uk, you'll get the Kickstarter. Same way like socials, ratwave.ratwave.uk. I think the physical website is ratwave.square.site. But yeah, via ratwave.uk, I've now said it too many times, I'm starting to worry I'm mixing up. Via there, you can find links to everything. And I also have a big blog on there, which has loads of like granular breakdowns of different things about Psycho Dungeon that I find interesting as well. So if that's another thing, if you're still going just like, I want to know more, I don't want to wait until August or whenever the game's finished, go read my blog. It's full of Psycho Dungeon.
Here we go. Yeah, you definitely want to go check out ratwave.uk. That's ratwave.u.k. You got to say it a bunch. We all listen to radio ads. Kayla, thank you so much for coming on. You know, it's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. Always look forward to whatever's coming next. So really excited to see Psycho Dungeon get funded and get put in our hands. So again, if you haven't backed it yet, go back it. And thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
All right. That'll be it for today. We'll make sure all the links to everything are down there just in case you didn't get that. It's ratwave.uk, and we'll see you all later. Bye, everybody.